This is a video for my ninth graders in both ninth academic and ninth honors prepare for their upcoming exam on the progressives. What I'll be doing today is speaking over a PowerPoint that they could find online. Some of these slides have been introduced in class, and the PowerPoint in its entirety is also on my Moodle. What you'll see right in front of you is Chapter 8 and 13, the Progressive Movement. Ninth Honors, you're in Chapter 13. Ninth Academic, you're in Chapter 8. Both of these chapters cover very similar material. Now, I'm going to be speaking largely to Chapter 8 for my academics. We have already covered Chapter 8, Section 1, which is going to be the first few slides, which I'm just going to go over just for everybody's benefit. And then I will chime in when we're on to 8.2 and 8.3, which is going to be on their upcoming assessment. The progressive movement, by some definitions, is from 1890 to 1920, though I would say it picks up steam probably in 1901 when Theodore Roosevelt becomes the president. But it's not saying that some of these things weren't going on beforehand. So what is progressivism? Progressivism in my class is a general movement, a movement amongst the people and of course politicians, to reform, there's a big word there, or change society. Now, to reform or change society, you could have it coming from the people through their actions, but what I'll be focusing on is how their goal was to increase the government's role. What should the government do for the people is going to be what I'll be focusing on in progressivism. Progressivism was largely led by the middle class, the educated, the urban, the people who didn't need a lot of government help but saw so many problems that they wanted to help. It focused on a variety of political, economic, and social issues. It wasn't on one thing, such as women's right to vote. That was only one part of progressivism. The most famous group of people that emerged before our presidents took hold were the Muckrakers. Muckrakers were people who investigated and reported on a bunch of social ills. My honors kids, we mentioned Ida B. Tarbell and Lincoln Steffens, where my academics, we focused solely on Jacob Riis and Upton Sinclair. We actually read How the Other Half Lives and The Jungle. So Ida B. Tarbell, she was big on trying to get rid of big corporations, saying that big monopolies like Standard Oil were intrusive and taking over everybody's life. They controlled banks, they controlled oil companies, they even controlled gas companies, insurance companies. In the end, you'll see it right here, they were strangling the people. Lincoln Steffens talks about corruption in the cities. Jacob Riis talked about how there was poverty and terrible lives and living conditions in the cities in his book, How the Other Half Lives. And finally, Upton Sinclair, and everybody in my classes knows Upton Sinclair. He wrote a novel where he did describe the conditions in the meatpacking industry, making you not really want a hot dog. So here's an essential question that we focused on, and I even had my ninth academics do a writing prompt on. It's how did progressives, the people who believed in this reform, how did they promote democracy, meaning more say in government for the average people? Well, the book mentions people like Robert La Follette of Wisconsin, who started a lot of grassroots movements. I didn't really cover this in class, and it will not be on your test. Now, some of the democratic ideals that emerged. This is 8.1, which we've already tested on, but this is also 13.1, which my honors kids haven't been tested on. Direct primary, initiative, referendum, and recall. These are all ways of getting people to have access to vote for the best candidates in the Democratic Party, the best candidates in the Republican Party, in order to for them to run in the general election. The direct primary in Pennsylvania, for example, allows all the Democrats in Pennsylvania to choose the best Democrat. Back in 2008, it was either Clinton or Obama to run as the Democratic best. Down here, initiative, that's when you have the power to initiate or introduce legislation to your state. Referendum is when you get to vote on legislation. California and a lot of other Western states use referendum when their legislatures don't want to vote on a law. They put it on the ballot and let the people vote on the law. That's real democracy. Of course, there's recall, and that's when when a lot of people don't like an official that's been elected. Recall allows you to have a vote to vote them out of office. There is no recall of the president for those who are interested. Sorry about that. Arnold Schwarzenegger came into power in California because he did, years ago, almost 10 years ago, lead a recall vote of the governor who in California wasn't very popular. After Arnold Schwarzenegger was successful in leading that recall vote, he then ran for governor and became a two-term governor of the state of California. Our Constitution changed with the 17th Amendment, which allows direct election of senators. At one time, per the Constitution, senators were elected by your state assembly in Harrisburg, for example. Now, your parents and I have the right to vote on our two senators when we go to the voting booth ourselves. That, ladies and gentlemen, is democracy. I think the best example of the introduction of democracy has to be in the women's movement to gain the right to vote. Suffrage is the right to vote. I have suffrage. Your parents have suffrage. If you're over 18, you have suffrage. But at one time, women did not have national suffrage. They could not vote for the President of the United States. But with the 19th Amendment, that changed. That also changed because, what also changed because of that is women were leading a temperance movement, a movement to get away from alcohol being legal. So right when the 19th Amendment was passed, when we were allowed to now vote for women were allowed to vote, we also had the 18th Amendment passed, which started the era of prohibition. This, honors students, is something you might want to study. There will be a question on the test on it. We did not take time in class to study political machines, but do understand there's an extra credit in it. Go ahead and look in the book on 13-1 on political machines. In 8-1 and 13-1, I took a little time to talk about Karl Marx, the Communist Manifesto, the belief that the proletariat, the workers, will eventually want to overthrow the bourgeoisie, the people who have money and who are in charge, and lead a new type of country. The Communist Manifesto, the creation of communism, written by Karl Marx, led to a lot of popularity in socialism and communism. We did read about this. Well, and in my honors kids, we've already covered how Eugene Debs was very popular in the 1912 election, even though he was in jail at the time. Here are just overviews of what capitalism is. I know we did this in class. We even did some cartoon drawing of it. Capitalism is wonderful. It makes you competitive. It rewards people thinking outside the box and trying to make money. I'm actually getting a phone call right now. That's annoying. It's a blocked call, so I don't care who it is. The United States has always prided itself on being a capitalist nation, but by today's standards, we're not purely capitalists. The government has a lot of power over our wealth. That's kind of like socialism. Now, socialism, by its definition, is when the government controls our economy. In the United States today, the government helps. The government taxes and spends. I can't say the government completely controls our economy or there wouldn't be rich people. That's why we are a very regulated capitalist nation. And of course, what we're going to study later this year is how communism around the world emerges and becomes very popular, even though, in my opinion, communism doesn't really exist. It's when people truly and purely share the wealth. Communism doesn't really exist because the government's not there to regulate it. People don't necessarily want to share the wealth. And in every nation that's tried to go towards communism, it's never been successful. The people of Papua New Guinea who live in their rainforest are communist, but no real country is communist. Cuba is not. China is not. North Korea is not. And for many years, Russia thought it was, and it was not. All right. Now, I want to backtrack just to show you some of the differences of our last conservative president, McKinley. Laissez-faire. He allowed a lot of capitalism to survive and compete and lead to American prosperity. Where Theodore Roosevelt, and we all know how he came into power, he's going to be a lot more progressive. He doesn't care necessarily what his Republican Party believes. He believed what he believed. And he believed in a regulated country, so there is a little bit more of economic equality for all. So they're both Republicans, but TR is our first progressive Republican. He truly believed that the president should have a heavy hand and the country should have a heavy-handed government in making sure there's more fairness and equality. So let's look at some examples. In 1901, when he came into power, he becomes very famous for his square deal belief. I shall see to it that every man has a square deal, no less and no more. This concept of a square deal means we as the country, the government, need to make sure that everybody has opportunity. Everybody has a chance. Everybody, even if you're born poor, can still make it. And I think what Theodore Roosevelt was trying to say is some people were born rich, some people were born poor, thus they will be poor and they will be rich for the rest of their life. And I think that he was looking at it as our society has not really given people a platform for success. And he thought that the government could solve that problem, thus progressivism. Now remember, Theodore Roosevelt comes to power because of being very famous and successful during the Spanish-American War. That's him in his Rough Riders outfit. Now, he wouldn't become the president, in my opinion, if this guy didn't get shot, William McKinley. Now we have President Roosevelt. President Roosevelt shows his progressivism in many ways. He invites the first African American to the White House to have a discussion. Booker T. Washington was invited to the White House. Nothing came of the meeting, but it shows that Theodore Roosevelt even wanted to show some of the African American community that they had an ear in the White House. But we have to understand the times. Theodore Roosevelt wasn't brave enough, nor did he think he would be successful enough to help in what we would call the civil rights movement of 50 years later. Theodore Roosevelt was very famous for being a conservationist, creating national parks throughout our country, but mostly in the West. Theodore Roosevelt wanted to regulate monopolies. This is him up here watching some of the largest monopolies or trusts getting busted. If you remember correctly, he took Northern Securities to the United States Supreme Court in the hopes of breaking up Northern Securities as being a monopoly of railroad companies out west. He won, and he earns the nickname Trust Buster. After he read The Jungle by Upton Sinclair, he pushed forward the Meat Inspection Act. Soon after, he pushed forward the Pure Food and Drug Act. Let's just say he believed that the government had a responsibility to regulate what was going in our bodies, since you and I didn't know. Is that really a medicine, or is it just a drug? Is that really a hamburger, or is that really... well, we all read that excerpt in class. Theodore Roosevelt did try to help out the workers during the coal strike of 1902. He actually sided largely with the workers in the coal mines. That's why I said in class he supported the proletariat. Hint of socialism, you see. He pushed forward the Hepburn Act. This is pretty intense. I know it's just a law and people think laws are unimportant, but come on. The Hepburn Act said the government has the legal right to regulate railroad companies, and if there are unfair prices or rates in the railroad companies, that the government of the United States has the right to regulate and set those prices. That's a hint of socialism, and many in my classes think it's fair because some of those rates were extreme. But let's also understand some people believe that is what capitalism is all about. If it's unfair, then go make your own railroad tracks, your own railroad company, and compete with them. Theodore Roosevelt was a unique individual. Up here you'll see he was a progressive, though he still was a Republican with some conservative views. He would never be a Democrat. He believed in some pure democracy and some radical thought, and he mixed it into a speech. And that's why it says up here, the more you mix in, the easier to satisfy every man. Meaning Theodore Roosevelt believed in helping whomever he wanted to help. It didn't need to be a Republican or a Democrat or rich or a poor. That's why some people didn't like TR, because he did whatever he wanted to do, and that's not traditional. Usually we have politicians who do what the party thinks. He chooses to leave office after his 2 terms and push forward his friend, William Howard Taft. William Howard Taft wins the election of 1908. He's a Republican who serves 1 term. He's much more subdued than TR, not as cocky or boisterous. TR picks him because he trusted Taft to continue his progressivism. In many ways, Taft did. He had an impressive resume, a lawyer, a former governor general of the Philippines. He was full-figured, and I'm sorry to say that kind of did matter. There was a perception that Taft wasn't as awesome as TR. TR was loud, cocky, boisterous, and physically fit, where Taft was quiet, shy, and unfortunately perceived by some as not being as good, maybe even because of his weight. He is a Republican who allows his Republican allies to have a lot of influence over him and the goals he set. He was a true trust buster, busting more trusts than Theodore Roosevelt in just half the time. He did help create the Children's Bureau, the Mount Alkins Act, and the Payne-Aldrich Tariff. When you look at attacking child labor, increasing regulatory powers, and lowering the national tariff, these were all progressive ideals. Many people have tried to sell Taft as a conservative Republican, and in your teacher's opinion, that's wrong. He was progressive, he just didn't sell it as well as TR. And as everybody that's watching this knows, you need to sell yourself to be successful. Unfortunately, I guess. In 1912, it's a unique election because TR comes back from safari in Africa and actually wants to be the president again. And per the Constitution, he was legally allowed to do that. He attacks his BFF Taft and calls him a flub-dub of the second rate, making fun of his weight and his intellectual abilities. Taft is supported by the conservative Republicans. TR is supported by the progressive Republicans. The Republicans nominate Taft, this hand, to run for president. But trust me, TR is not a quitter, and TR decides to continue to run for president as being a member of a third party. Outside watching all of this was the Democrat Woodrow Wilson. This is how the election panned out. Wilson won. He won the popular vote and the electoral vote. He won all of these, let's go with periwinkle states. Theodore Roosevelt comes in second. Look at that popular vote, winning the tan states. And of course, a very disappointing third for William Howard Taft, who's unable to win more than 2 states in the Union. But do notice, if you add 4 plus 3, that equals 7. So in theory, the Republican could have won against the Democrat. I think that if TR won the Republican nomination, he would have beat Wilson. But that didn't happen. The Republican vote was split. Wilson wins. Down here, you'll see 1 million people voted for other parties, such as Eugene Debs' Socialist Party, which wins 6% of the popular vote. Our country was moving very much towards the progressive way of life. Big government. Wilson, ladies and gentlemen, is a super progressive. Running for 2 successful terms as a Democrat. He is our only president with a PhD. He was at one time the president of Princeton. I'd like to give a shout out that at one time he was a teacher. Holla! He was a 1-term governor of New Jersey, launching him to fame as a progressive. One of my favorite quotes of his is, "Liberty has never come from government, but from the limitation of it." That's why he helped support the women's movement of suffrage. And I think he believes more hands in the pot having ideas will help make government more responsive. Now, in our next chapter, we will study World War I. So as you understand the next slide, during his progressive reign as president, he was also dealing with World War I abroad. So, Theodore Roosevelt believed in creating a progressive nation. To have business prosperity, he believed in passing new laws about the tariff, new laws about the currency, and new laws about antitrusts. Put them all in here and pump out success. He believes that government is the solution. The Underwood tariff lowers tax on imports, trying to make more goods come in cheaper and make more competition. Passes the 16th Amendment, which we studied, the 17th Amendment, the 18th Amendment, the 19th Amendment. These are 4 constitutional amendments passed in just, 7 years. In over 100 years, we passed 15, and in just his 2 terms, we passed 4. He creates the Federal Reserve, which watches over our currency, That'll be explained in class. It's pretty confusing, but in short, the government controls interest rates that banks lend. He creates the Federal Trade Commission to regulate trade. He creates the Clayton Antitrust Act, which again just furthers this trust-busting notion that big, successful monopolies should be broken up by the government. He did more, but at some point you need to stop reading them all, okay? Here's a multiple choice practice. After we've studied 3 presidents and all of these laws, which of the following is the best description of the progressive movement? A time period when U.S. presidents became stronger than Congress. A time period that saw the expansion of America's power throughout the world. A time period dominated by many attempts at social, political, and economic reform. A time period where many laws were passed. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a bit true, but it's a little presumptive that Taft was stronger than Congress. Progressivism is not about expansion. There were many attempts at social, political, and economic reform. That's the definition of progressivism, so this is the right answer. And though it was a time period where many laws were passed, some of those laws could have been talking about chickens not eating ducks. So that's too broad. The best answer is the third one here. Finally, our last topic is Booker T versus W.E.B. Du Bois. The short story is the civil rights movement of the early 1900s did not have the support of the government. So this is progressive in the idea that they're fighting for change, but it's not progressive because the government didn't support them. This could be a 20-minute overview in itself. Just understand we are going to do this exact slide in class. These 2 men, Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois, had some similarities. They both wanted change, they wanted equality, they wanted to help out the African American community that has, even though the Civil War is over, still faced racism and poverty. But they have different backgrounds, different educations, different demands, different goals, and they created different things. I'm sorry about the ambiguity. Somebody's at my front door, so we're done for the day. Take care.